Hey everyone, this is Ken Klippenstein with TYT Investigates. I'm here to talk to you about a new article in Politico titled Democratic Insiders, Bernie could win the nomination. It's pretty clear from that title what the article's about, but what's interesting about it is that this is appearing in a very mainstream, fairly established outlet, Politico, and we're getting to see it dawn on party leadership what anyone who's been watching the polls carefully over the last few weeks has seen, which is that it's a real possibility that Bernie Sanders could walk away with this nomination, and it's just now dawning on the elites of the party that could happen after probably months of closed-door meetings of them saying, we have nothing to worry about, maybe Biden or someone else is going to take care of this. So it's very interesting to see how they're processing this fear, because they don't want this to happen. Bernie Sanders himself is not a Democrat. And in addition to that, he doesn't owe them anything in a lot of ways, because the party has, done things to try to impede his progress. So there's a lot of concern, I think, that someone who doesn't owe anything to the party might win. So there are a number of interesting quotes in this article that I'm going to read to you guys that I think is pretty insightful. One is by Dan Pfeiffer, who is, top advisor to President Obama, and he co-hosts the podcast. It's called Pod Save America, very popular liberal podcast. He says, this is in the article, I linked to it in the video description if you want to check that out. He says, quote, "I believe people should take him, Bernie Sanders, very seriously. He has a very good shot of winning Iowa, a very good shot of winning New Hampshire, and other than Joe Biden, the best shot of winning Nevada." And so I'm going to cut in here for a moment and know that those are the first three states. You win those first three states, whew, the momentum from that would be incredible. He goes on to say he could build a real head of steam heading into South Carolina and Super Tuesday. And the thing is, Pfeiffer is absolutely right. People who've listened to Pod Save America and are familiar with Pfeiffer in sort of the Obama circle generally know that, while they're not necessarily, a group that is, hating and dunking on Sanders all the time, they're certainly not, he's certainly not their first choice. So it's interesting to see him and someone from that circle characterize his chances, which I think that was a fair characterization. He does have quite a good chance of winning the first three states. And once you've done that, the media cycle and sort of the framing of, can Bernie win in the general is going to look a lot different than it does now, because it's going to be hard to say that he can't win in the general if he's just sweeping state after state in the beginning. And, as he says, polls suggest that there is a, good chance that could happen. So the second interesting quote from this article that I want to read you guys from David Brock. He's sort of the consummate Democrat insider. If you guys watch Game of Thrones, he sort of reminds me of Littlefinger. He's this scheming sort of guy that knows a lot of the top donors within the Democratic party. And so if you want to get a sense of who the guys that are really running things with the money and power behind the party, he's a good barometer for that. So he says, quote, "It may have been inevitable that eventually you would have two candidates representing each side of the ideological divide in the party. A lot of smart people I've talked to lately think there's a very good chance those people end up being Biden and Sanders." And I thought there was a good characterization. Biden representing the sort of old guard, big money approach. I mean, I think he's the only one with a super PAC, which is, quite amazing, meaning you can get all of this dark money from corporations virtually limitless. And then, Sanders representing the more progressive tendency, doesn't have a super PAC, has a lot of small dollar donors. I thought that was an interesting way to frame it, but it's also interesting because it's him. I mean, I would guess that his horse in the race, I'm almost certain, is not Bernie Sanders. It's going to be basically anyone else. So it's amazing to see him come out and say, I mean, the subtext here is that they're trying to warn the rest of the party. They're saying, guys, it's time to wake up to this. This could really happen. We have to stop writing him off. Because, I have to imagine David Brock is not trying to help Bernie Sanders win. He's trying to warn his other rich donor friends about what might happen if they don't start taking him seriously. And when he says a lot of smart people I've talked to lately think he has a very good chance, these are the Dem donors. These are the elites. These are people that he has relationships with. So it's very interesting, because I think that's an indication that the party is waking up to this. Let's see here. So the article goes on to talk about how it seemed for a while like Warren might be the standard bearer for the progressives before she had a sort of slump in the polls in the last several weeks, as many of you I'm sure have noticed. And Brock goes on to say, the article notes he has, quote, close relationship with many Democratic donors, that for the first time he's not hearing any sort of talk about how they're going to screw Bernie and block him from the nomination internally in the party, which is amazing because that has to be something they're talking about all the time, is how do we make sure that this Democratic Socialist doesn't win, and make sure that one of our guys that we want and that we have influence with and that we control through our donations, how do you make sure one of them wins? So that's incredible that they're not even talking about a plan or how to stop them, because it may be that they perceive this as unavoidable at this point. Another interesting quote is from a former director of Pete Buttigieg's New Hampshire campaign. He said, quote, "If you really think about it, Bernie hasn't been hit a lot with anything. It's not like he's getting hit by other campaigns." And that's very true. There's very few attacks on Sanders. Watch the debates. How many people come at him? Virtually nobody. That's incredible. Because think about how much ire there is for him within the party and desire for him not to win the nomination. Why are they not attacking him? Is it because they're nice? I don't think so. I think they're afraid of him. I think they're afraid of, if they attack him, what that is going to mean, given his reputation within the base and his power to sort of, articulate the contours of what is said to be, progressive ideology. So they're scared of him, I think. So this person goes on, Buttigieg, former New Hampshire director. If you check the article, you can see quotes. He says that Sanders had waned a little bit a couple months ago when people were looking at other options, and now they're saying, wait a minute, this guy has been the most consistent of anyone. And that is a theme you see throughout this article and throughout the polling. If you take a look at the polling, his numbers are extraordinarily durable. While he's not been at the top of every state, in many cases that's been Biden, his numbers have shown the least variability in terms of, shooting up and down, almost like the stocks. You see, one day Buttigieg is a sort of marginal candidate. The next, whoosh, he's leading in Iowa maybe, or, whatever other state. So Sanders is the opposite. He has a very strong, very dedicated, it seems like 20% of the electorate or so. And it doesn't shoot up, but it also doesn't go down very much. And it seems like, party leaders are starting to realize this. And again, if anyone had bothered to look at the polls, or if the media had bothered to report on them in a direct way, instead of not talking about what's not convenient, this would have been clear months ago that his support is solid and it's steady. David Axelrod. So this is the consummate Obama. He was like his chief campaign advisor, I believe, in 2008. Top Obama guy, very, very close in that whole circle. He says, quote, "We never talk about Bernie Sanders." That is an Obama official saying what we know, which is that the media doesn't cover Bernie Sanders, that there's a virtual blackout. He's admitting it. Someone solidly in the center of the party, not an activist, not someone way out on the left, is saying, quote, "We never talk about Bernie Sanders." He goes on to say, he's actually doing pretty well in this polling. He's actually picked up. And the fact is, Bernie is as consistent can be. That's exactly the sentiment that Buttigieg's New Hampshire director, who I just quoted you from, was trying to express. And that's exactly true. He's very steady numbers. These are not, fair weather supporters, it doesn't seem like. And then Steve Kornacki, very high up guy at MSNBC. MSNBC is, many of you know, cable sort of leans liberal, but no friend of Sanders by any means, I don't think. You can certainly say MSNBC is pro-Democrat. You can say they're, pro-liberal. But once again, Bernie's not a Democrat. And in addition to that, they have their horses, and it's not Sanders. So with that background in mind, this guy from there, Steve Kornacki, is their national political correspondent, been there a long time, very powerful guy, says, quote, "Democratic voters like him, and if he starts winning, there could be a bandwagon effect." And that's 100% true. While his base is steady at 20% or so, like I said before, that seems to be the floor rather than the ceiling, which is to say, when there's not a lot of variability, it's not going to go below that, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't go up once there becomes the perception that, yes, he could win this thing. And that in voters' minds is a huge concern, is who could beat Trump, who is realistic. And we're not going to know that until we've seen who's won Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and then the performance in Super Tuesday. So once you see him start winning states, anything can happen. I think the ball's in the air. We don't know exactly what's going to play out, but they're starting to say this is a possibility. Frank Luntz, the classic Republican pollster, he says of California and Bernie's shockingly good numbers there. You'll notice Bernie's essentially leading if you look at the recent polls in California, which is astonishing. That is the most delegate-rich state in the country. If he wins that, the doors are going to blow up. And so Luntz says, Quote, I think you're going to see continued movement with respect to California. Sanders has been gaining in California over the past 2 months. Once again, that's a Republican pollster saying that. Very interesting. And so the article closes on one of Sanders' advisors sort of responding to all this and saying what he thinks. I thought he put out a pretty good remark. He said, I'm going to read from the article here. Faiz Shakir, Sanders' campaign manager, said political insiders and pundits are rethinking his chances, quote, not out of the goodness of their heart, but because it is harder and harder to ignore him when he's rising to every average that you see. And I think that's 100% right. They're not doing this because suddenly, I love Sanders. No, these guys hate Sanders. They want him. They want anyone but Sanders. That is a sentiment that we have heard repeatedly from party leadership. Sanders isn't a Democrat. Why do we want to support him? Anyone but, they're always trying to offer, it's like, check out, they're always trying to pump up people like, Klobuchar. Maybe you like Klobuchar. No, you don't like, okay. How about Buttigieg? He seems pretty promising. No, not, okay, well, check this out. It seems like they're trying to offer up any alternative they can, possibly conceive of besides Sanders. So for them to start saying he might win this thing, they're not doing that to help him by any means. They're doing it because they actually think that's something that could happen, and I think they're trying to warn the rest of the party, guys, it's time to start taking this seriously. He closes, the Sanders campaign manager closes saying, we want that, the conversation about Sanders' electability, and quote, I'd love to be able to argue why he stands a better chance to beat Donald Trump than Joe Biden. And if you look at the matchups, Biden versus Trump and then Sanders versus Trump, seems very similar right now. And again, as the notion that he could win becomes more of a realistic thing rather than something in the abstract, I think you're going to see those matchups start to look different and perhaps Sanders looking better. Once again, this is Ken Klippenstein with TYT Investigates. Throw us a like, throw this video a like. That helps us a lot. And thanks so much for joining me. Have a great weekend, guys. Take care now.